Okay, I'm back. All right, thank you for your patience. You can tell it's nearing the end of the semester. I'm like spinning a zillion different directions at one time. Good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Giselle Anatol. I'm the director here at the Hall Center for the Humanities. I'm delighted to have you join us for the 2025-2026 Humanities Speaker Series. This academic year, the Hall Center celebrates its 20th anniversary in this historic building, the building once known as the Boiler House, and also the 50th anniversary of our presence as a humanities center here on campus, on KU's campus. These achievements were made possible by so many people who contributed financial gifts, time, energy, vision, and a belief in the power of the humanities to light our way in a world that sometimes struggles with complexity and the nuances of the human experience, a world that sometimes resists taking the time to explore and understand the past and consider possible futures. We remain especially grateful to the Hall family and the Hall Family Foundation, after whom we're named, for their support over the years, the Friends of the Hall Center for their sustained contributions, Kansas Public Radio for helping us connect with an array of audiences, and their fabulous Rex. Rex, what an amazing radio essay, for those of you who might have heard it this morning. But we're so grateful to KPR for helping us connect with audiences such as you, and thankful for you to come out and support us. And now for my introduction of tonight's special guest, Hannes Zacharias was hired as a professor of the practice in KU's School of Public Affairs and Administration in 2019. In that role, he brings the extensive experience and practical application of public administration theory and from the outside world, outside of academia, to his colleagues and his students, graduate students and undergraduates, having spent over 4 decades administering government at the federal, state, county, and city levels. His distinguished career in public service began in 1978, when he became the executive director of the Associated Students of Kansas and lobbied the Kansas Board of Regents and the state legislature on behalf of students across 6 Kansas universities. In subsequent years, he served as the assistant to the city manager for the city of Lawrence, the city administrator for Boonville, Missouri, the city manager of Hays, Kansas, the county manager of Johnson County, Kansas, and on the Regional Homeland Security Coordinating Committee of the Mid-America Regional Council. He has played a pivotal role in securing bridges over the Missouri River, the preservation of the historic neighborhoods, building industrial parks, implementing community recycling in rural areas, securing long-term water resources for parts of rural Kansas. He has won an All-American City Award and engaged with people from all over this region and all walks of life. His current educational mission is to foster a workforce that is focused on outcomes, inclusivity, and sustainability. Professor Zacharias' invitation to speak tonight came about as a collaboration between the Hall Center and Outdoors Unscripted, an organization established to host an annual festival dedicated to Midwestern outdoor adventures in all shapes and forms, and storytelling, visual arts, creative performances, and dining experiences that are informed and inspired by connections with local ecosystems. Their website promotes everything from the, quote, beautifully ordinary moments in your backyard to once-in-a-lifetime thrills, and strives to stimulate engagement with the outdoors that is both accessible to all residents, and reflective of our community's unique landscapes and perspectives. This attention to the diverse range of landscapes and waterscapes and perspectives of the Midwest made Hannes Zacharias a perfect fit as someone who has kayaked from Kansas to New Orleans, not once, but twice, including many other adventures on our nation's rivers. I'm so excited to learn so much more. I hope you are too. So please join me in giving a rousing welcome to Hannes Zacharias.
Thank you for that introduction. It's just how I wrote it. Terrific. No, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and visit with me this evening, which I hope at least will be entertaining. The Arkansas River. It is the 6th longest river in the world, in the United States, the 45th longest in the world, about 1,400 miles long. It has a collection basis of 170,000 square miles, covering 4 different states. And for about 21% of its length, mostly in central and western Kansas, is totally dry. So in 1976, a young 22-year-old person, me, decided to carry a bicentennial message from the mayor of Dodge City to the mayor of New Orleans, covering that area about 1,500 square miles. This is proof that I indeed did do that. The kayak you see on the left-hand side is a Klepper kayak. There's more questions about that. We can answer those after the session or tomorrow morning. My mom and my father and my sister in the photograph in the upper right, and you can see me down the lower left receiving an honorary citizen to the city of New Orleans. Wonderful experience. However, when I did in 1976, I realized that indeed I did not cover the entire length of the river. Basically about 500 miles short of its origin and about 100 miles short of where it dumps into the Gulf of Mexico. So at that point in time, I thought I'd been dreaming for the last about 42 years. Wouldn't it be nice to actually follow a drop of water from the Continental Divide down to the Gulf of Mexico? If you've ever been, and I know you have, been on the side of a river, and you've been wondering about where did that water come from and where did it go, that's the kind of adventures I had both in 1976 and in 2018. So this is me gathering snow from the pass, Tennessee Pass, above Leadville, Colorado, because I wanted to capture a piece of water, some water to actually pour it. My vision was, which is important, to actually carry that water downstream and pour it into the Gulf of Mexico, symbolic of connecting those two regions. That's me in the middle doing a shakedown on Lake Clinton and my wonderful spouse and wife, Marcia, at the end of the journey. But I want to start this presentation. So this is a story about those two trips. And along that way, we're going to learn about me. We're going to learn about the various people I interacted in, some humorous stories, some near-death experiences, and hopefully you'll learn something about the Arkansas River you may not have heard before. I title it the Rediscovering the Arkansas River for 2 reasons, because most of us have some understanding that there is a river called the Arkansas River, and it exists somewhere in Kansas, but nobody knows that much about it generally, so this is rediscovering it for you all. For me, it's rediscovering it from 1976 to 2018, hence the reason why I titled the presentation. I want to start out this with talking about some fundamentals. I'm going to talk a little bit about the brief history, some hydrology, and then talk about my experiences. But the most burning question that is out there is, how do you pronounce it? Arkansas or Arkansas, as far as that is concerned. So if you look at the literature, it really is pretty diverse. What I have discerned is that the French were much better at promulgating their version of what it should be pronounced versus the Spanish. It was Nepeste by De Soto in 1541. That same year, Coronado declared El Rio de San Pablo, San Pablo, when he actually crossed the Arkansas River in Dodge City. Eventually, though, Marquette came down from the areas of the Great Lakes and encountered the Native Americans in that area, and Arkansas was the name. It got memorialized by Zebulon Pike in 1811, making it Arkansas, S-A-W. It was debated actually in Arkansas itself between the two centers, is Arkansas or Arkansas. It was settled basically in 1881 to say it be spelled A-R-K-N-S-A-S, but it was to be pronounced Arkansas. That was reconfirmed again in 2010 to go and pronounce that. So basically, choose what you want to go ahead and be. If you're in Kansas, I think you should pronounce it Arkansas. That if you're a true Kansas is what you say. You'll hear me talk about it both ways, but mostly the arc as far as that's concerned. I want to talk about the brief history to give us some context, brief by virtue of from Louisiana Purchase forward, but let's not forget that indeed the area we're talking about actually was occupied by the indigenous population for thousands of years primarily among these 6 different tribes: the Ute, the Arapaho, the Kiowa, the Osage, the Rayados or Wichita, the Quapaw tribes as well. One of my I guess disappointments of the studying of this is the lack of information I can get about the indigenous populations before the Western discoverers came into play. But let's talk about the Western explorers that came and interacted with the river. First, we're talking about Coronado's expedition in 1541, which engaged with the river around Dodge City. You actually see a big cross at Dodge City where he came across all the way up to Great Bend, looking for the 7 cities of gold in that area that he thought he had found. Also, later on in 1673, that's where Marquette and Joliet encounter coming down the Mississippi, and they go as far south before they stop at the end of the Arkansas River and then go back north again. So that kind of gives you a sense of its importance from a geography perspective. Let's talk about its importance, though, also with the Louisiana Purchase, which obviously was put in 1803, and it was the collection basin for the Mississippi River, of which the Arkansas River is part of that whole historical document. If you look back at your particular property, if you're looking at abstracts, page 1 of your abstract, should you have one, actually starts with the Louisiana Purchase. However, that also then led to the expeditions of Zebulon Pike in 1805 at that time period, whose purpose was to go ahead and find the headwaters of the Arkansas River. He actually started out looking up at the Osage, going through the area right now where the lakes are, encountering Kansas, going from the Nebraska border, and then getting down to where Port Zahara is, which is where Great Bend, and following that river all the way to the west, looking at and naming, he never climbed it, Pikes Peak. This whole area, so it was a significant geographical location in terms of how people oriented themselves to the Midwest with the Arkansas River, much like the Platte, but certainly the Arkansas River was important about that, especially when you talk about the reorientation of how negotiations happened between the United States and Spain, trying to reconfigure the boundaries of the Louisiana Purchase, where they basically made the southern boundary along the Red River, the northern boundary on the Arkansas River, and where those two should meet would be the 100th meridian. Now, why is that important? Because that's exactly where I grew up, in Dodge City. That's where Dodge City was located, and why Dodge City is there, because it's the 100th meridian. So if you're on the east side of Dodge City, north of the river, you're in the United States. If you're on the west side, you're still in the United States. You cross the river, and just went over to the west, you were in foreign territory. You were in Spain. Now, in 1821, what happened then? Of course, the Mexico wins its independence from Spain, and that kicks off what? It kicks off the Santa Fe Trail, which uses the river again as a major landmark. Coming out, I'm actually starting in New Franklin, Missouri, coming out all the way with William Becknell with his 3 or 4 wagons, trying to go ahead and sell goods into Spain. He does so, comes back, and doesn't get 2% or 20% or 200%. He gets 2,000% return on his investment, and that kicks off the Santa Fe Trail. But again, a major marker of that was the river itself, all the way from Great Bend, all the way over basically to the Colorado Rockies. It was a significant rigor. You're also talking about the boat traffic occurs on the river as well, as early as 1822. Ferrying people all the way over to Fort Smith in that area, but most importantly, back in the 1803, 1830s and so forth, the Indian Removal Act comes into play, and thousands of Indians were then transported up the Mississippi and up the Arkansas River and dropped off at Fort Smith to go ahead and be part of the migration out into Indian Territory. Remember that Fort Smith was put in place in 1817 as a way to go ahead and reduce the amount of warring between the tribes that were being injected into that area. They then left. They come back again in 1833 after the Indian Removal Act, because they were trying to protect and keep people out of the Indian Territory, to stop people selling alcohol and drugs and guns into the area there as well. So significant things going on in that location, part of the river situation. I'll stop there with the brief history, but I want to give you some context. The next thing we're going to talk about is the hydrology, in broad brush here. People are much more expert here than I am, but I want to kind of give you a general landscape here. As we talk about it. We're talking about basically that the Arkansas River certainly is a river that has a huge basin. What I think is interesting for me on this, if it does work here, is that if you look at this from Kansas, basically there's a line on the top of Kansas that the water going north of this line is water that goes to the Missouri River, and to the south goes to the Arkansas River. So that's an important landmark for the next thing we'll be talking about in just a moment. But it's a huge watershed to provide that water for this 1,500-mile-long river. It also has augmentation by virtue of the natural inland sea that was here in the area before. If you've not had a chance to see the Sternberg Museum in Hayes, please do so. It gives you a great chronological about the actual kind of sea creatures that were in this area with the fossilized remains that way. Of course, this becomes the inland sea, becomes the cursors for the Ogallala Aquifer. You can see this here in terms of its current use and kind of drawdowns. People are here to know much more than I do about that. But the river is part of that whole system here and dissects it. Most of the time, actually, the Arkansas River was contributing water to the Ogallala, and in some cases actually augmented its flow in other directions. However, one of the biggest things about the Arkansas River for our conversation today is this line. And what this line is, in my view, is the amount of precipitation that occurs east and west of that line. East of that line, in Kansas's viewpoint, you're talking about 43 to 46 inches of rain per year. On the western side, you're talking about 14 inches of rain per year, a huge difference. And I look at it from the national perspective, having both been in Hayes, Kansas, we call it Hayes, America, and also in Johnson County. I can tell you that the politics and people's attitudes administratively to those to either side of that line are significantly different. If you talk about west of that line all the way to California, you're talking about getting water. If you're talking about the east side of that line, you're talking about how to get rid of water by virtue of stormwater and flooding. Significant aspects of that. And the Arkansas River is right smack dab in the middle of that, which gives you some sense of that. Now that we've established the ideas about some basic history, some basic understanding of hydrology, let's go ahead and walk through my adventures, both in 1976 and in 2018. And I'm going to break it down in 6 different sections. The first section really is that area from Tennessee Pass above Leadville, Colorado, all the way down to Pueblo Reservoir. This area you see on the map. What I think is interesting about it is you look at this 125 mile, 150 mile area. This used to be an area back in the 1930s and 1940s around Salida that actually was the vegetable basket for Colorado Springs, Pueblo, etc., until the Grand Valley opens up in California and it becomes destitute. It becomes really a terrible place to go ahead and be. They could not raise the crops to go ahead and provide much activity. The second thing that happened was that all the pollution from the Leadville mines comes in and makes this entirely a very unassuming and really unattractive area, to the point that places like Salida during that time built some walls to go ahead and protect their community away from the river. The EPA comes in and does some great things. Decides to go and clean up the river. There's still several going on superfunds in this area, but that brings in people, the river, and trout comes back. What happens then, though, it starts attracting people from Scandinavia that want to say, this would be great to go ahead and do kayaking, and fishermen want to come in. The problem with that is that indeed that provides a level of kind of conflict between landowners and others, which we'll talk about in just a second. What's important about this to understand is that every drop of water in this area is managed at beginning point, no question about that. And this, what that line here you're putting is the Continental Divide. What I find interesting about this at the headwaters, that you're seeing water that actually comes from the western side over to the eastern side into the Arkansas River. This actually was established back in the 1960s by President Kennedy with called the Frying Pan Arkansas River Project, trying to actually bring water from the west side to the east side, as far as that is concerned. I was floored that there's actually water from the west side coming to the Arkansas River when I started investigating this. How much water comes out? Well, the Bowstead Tunnel is a huge tunnel about 5 miles long, and here's what it looks like when indeed you see water coming out of it.
Headwaters of the Arkansas River. Flowing down into Turquoise Lake. Where it starts.
Beautiful territory, obviously. When it comes out of the reservoir, it's a very small stream, hard to go and navigate, but it quickly becomes a torrent, which indeed becomes very hard to go and navigate without rubber rafts.
Railroad bridge on the Arkansas River looking upstream.
So you can see that I decided not to go ahead and use my kayak here because I wanted to avoid injury and death. So I did rubber raft from that point in time as well. Like I said before, people started coming in, appreciating the wild nature, the trout stream fishing, as well as the kayaking, created conflicts with landowners. Guns were drawn, people get injured. This is not very good for tourism. Then the state legislature puts in place the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area that starts collecting revenues from everyone kind of doing the 200,000 raptors on an annual basis and makes it now almost a $200 million industry, allowing places like Salida to go ahead and flourish and do excellent work. But let's talk about what does it look like in this 150-mile stretch when indeed you're on a whitewater raft.
Royal Gorge. Definitely a top 5 run on the Arkansas River. The Royal Gorge has everything you could want in a Colorado whitewater rafting trip. Big rapids along with grand geologic features.
Wow, what a contrast and what a great trip. I did indeed do that. I'm the guy in the yellow helmet surviving that kind of activity. It was wonderful. So you would expect that it comes out of the Royal Gorge and it hits Canyon City. The river is going to be very much similar that way, very wild and rugged. It isn't. It is a placid river. Automatically kind of comes down to the point where it becomes a prairie river, very cold, lots of volume, but not any rapids per se as far as that is concerned. A dramatic difference as far as that's concerned. So that's the first section that I wanted to talk about. The next section is from Pueblo Reservoir to Deerfield, and that's this section you see in red as well. And the Pueblo Reservoir looks like one it should not be there. It's much like if you go to Lake Powell and those sort of things, areas by the Grand Canyon, they're water that are in arid areas. Beautiful, though.
Swallows' nests on Pueblo Reservoir, upper reaches. Beautiful. Friends, Mike Feeback and Mike Peterson coming with me on the upper reaches.
Good buddies here that came along for various portions of my expedition in 2000. I'll turn that, the travels in 2018. But along with the river down Pueblo and so forth, it's had a torrent history. Back in 1921, floods came through the Arkansas River and destroyed much of Pueblo, requiring them to go ahead and actually build the river ducts and viaduct to the south of Pueblo, which is what you see there as well. It's now become basically a storm sewer slough, if you will, not very attractive. However, they have built a very nice, attractive place called the Pueblo Riverwalk, opened up in 2000. What I want to underscore is that's not where the river is. Okay, it's beautiful amenity. Don't get me wrong about it. It's very much like, it is exactly like San Antonio with their Riverwalk, which is a storm sewer system. An elegant one, admittedly, but it's storm sewer. They do a very good job of it. Not bemoaning that, but that's kind of where I just give you a sense of where it is and where it is not. As you go further to the east, my hope was I'd have enough volume of water that I could actually go ahead and kayak without being dragging and so forth, but no way.
So the dragging begins. There's water, but not really enough water to float in. So be it.
But as you can see, it's beautiful. Where there's water, there's life. You'll hear that expression again. And certainly was kind of a wonderful experience when there's enough water. Going further to the east, you can see the water plays at a point as well. The point about this is actually Bent's Fort. If you've not been to Bent's Fort, you should look at it, the reconstruction. Floating by it, you get a sense about why it's there. Why it's important to our discussion is because Bent's Fort was the first ones to actually put in ditch irrigation for that community back in the 1830s, and been much more irrigation on the upper parts of the Arkansas River ever since. But if you talked about ditch irrigation, which is significant, you really kind of understand about eastern Colorado. From Pueblo Reservoir to John Martin Reservoir, these are the existing stormwater, drainage ditches that are currently in place right now, the ditch system. Remind you that western Kansas has hundreds of various ditch systems as well. These are the ones remaining in Colorado. And how this works, for those of you who don't know exactly how this kind of happens, is that water will come out of the river, go into the fields, go back into the streams and tailings, come back in the river, go out again, go through the fields, come back into tailings, go back out in the fields and come back into the river, leaving it very polluted. When it actually comes down past John Martin Reservoir, it's one of the more polluted rivers in the country. That's not my assertion that or documentation is that way. I would go ahead and try to purify water later on downstream, but I wouldn't do it in this area. It's just too polluted. The other portion about that, when you have the ditch irrigation systems, you have these kind of things, which indeed are low water dams, which are very treacherous. There's no map that kind of maps these out per se, because no one's supposed to be traveling this part of the country in Colorado anyway, but they are devastating.
So this is the dam I had to portage around today. Water diversion structure. but have done so safely and successfully.
Now, I say that safely and successfully because the previous day I had actually had problems going through the low water dam and actually lost a paddle that I had to go and give up to the dam, if you will, and I did a video that was not fit for mixed company. So if you're looking at these low water dams and so forth, what does it look like when indeed you have a low water dam that's effectively pulling out the water going to ditch irrigation? This video has some sound problems in terms of wind, but it's instructive.
So again, this is the place where the Arkansas River comes in and gets divided between the ditch irrigation systems and the Arkansas River. So I'll show you, this is the inflow of the river. This is the ditch irrigation diversion dam. As I swing around, you'll see the remnants of the river after the water is taken. And you can see the river is virtually non-existent. It's a dry bed. Keep on swinging around and you can see there's where all the water is in the ditch irrigation system, virtually brim full. Very interesting.
So it's now become private property, and I can't travel on private property. And this is where my attitudes changed. I grew up in Dodge City, as you know earlier from that conversation, and I understand the need for using irrigation and maybe the river to maybe 50%, maybe a little bit more, but not 100% in my viewpoint. That's where I think I decided to go ahead and say that people care a great deal about the amount of water that the Arkansas River brings, but virtually nobody cares about the Arkansas River, and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. And I think that's a travesty and probably our value system we have to look at, irrespective of the economics that are coming on. That's a value statement we've made about this historically significant river that's been around for thousands of years is now gone and dried up. We'll see some more stuff later on. I did get a chance to go further to the east in John Martin Reservoir, and I see this picture here. There's plenty of water on the downstream side of the reservoir. The night before, it was non-existent. There was nothing coming out at all. I was really disappointed. Slept the night, wake up the next morning, this happened. Why? Because Kansas had called upon its 40% of the water in John Martin Reservoir, and I was riding that wave going downstream. Wonderful as far as that's concerned. I want to reiterate, though, even further to the east, we have historical documentation of how the river used to look like. This is at Bent's New Fort, near Fort Lyons, which is no longer in existence from that point. But you can see this picture that there was water during that time period. It was not inconsequential. It was a river that indeed we paid a great deal of attention to at a national level. Going to that now, at this point in time, I had a chance to look at it from the river viewpoint. Here's what it looks like.
So portaging around the remains of New Fort and Fort Lyons, original Fort Lyons. These outcroppings here were well known to those in the Santa Fe Trail and Native Americans. So Mr. Bent, after the first fort burned down, decided relocated here. It's now outside of one of the diversion dams. There are carvings and people's signatures from the Santa Fe Trail days.
And that's one of the fun things that you kind of see along this trip about how people use the area and have some kind of historic relics. Remember that where there's water, there's indeed life and there's recreation. So people indeed were enjoying the river while I was there in inner tubes and stock tanks. It becomes very beautiful and wonderful. But how beautiful is the area between Kansas and Colorado? This is a few minute long video, but it gives you the sense of the serene nature of that river in southwest Kansas and eastern Colorado.
So here I am on the Arkansas River, far eastern Colorado, about 6 miles east of Grenada, between Grenada and Hawley. Be crossing over the Kansas border here shortly. The amazing thing is the amount of water. And again, it's because Kansas has called for its proportion of water out of John Martin Reservoir, and it rained last night, so good flow so far. Hopefully it won't be too much of a blistering day, but we'll see. So when we say a prairie river, you can see what you mean. The prairie is just beyond here. Pretty typical of rivers like the upper parts of the Missouri going through Nebraska, or the Platte, the Republic River, and those sort of things. So give you a taste of what a prairie river looks like. Bridge ahead is the bridge just south of Hawley, Colorado. The last bridge in Colorado before I get to Kansas. Woohoo! So I don't know exactly what's going on here, but this is about a half a mile to the west of the Kansas border, the north side of the river. And as you can see, it's just totally defoliated. Everything is dead. And I just don't understand how or why. Very interesting. So back there is Colorado. And up here is Kansas. Pretty cool. In Kansas now, the Ark River in western Kansas. First one of these I've seen, grain elevators. This is the grain elevator in Coolidge. Very interesting. See how the landscape changes, if it does, being in Kansas compared to Colorado. This is one of them. So, getting ready to pull out this great day. Beautiful.
Note that thing hanging down. I had to celebrate somehow. I will have to admit that when I watch that video, my blood pressure reduces because it takes me back to that time period of how indeed placid that river is. I didn't have to paddle, great flow. It was just serene, just beautiful. The second thing is that device hanging down is the actual gauge that indeed measures how much water comes across the border. And we handle it so methodically, it's exactly, I'd suspect, right on the money about how much water is going to be coming across the border according to the Kansas-Colorado-Arkansas River Compact. But it's not like eastern Colorado has diversions that western Kansas doesn't. These are the existing diversions that exist right now outside of Garden City. So you can get a sense of that we still have a lot of activity going on as far as ditch education is concerned. As you go further to the east, the river, obviously, where there's water, people then use it, and they use it sometimes illegally. This is an illegal water pump. What the heck? Just go ahead and put the pump in, use the crops. Who's going to come out and be the wiser? Who's traveling down the river to begin with? Also along my trip, I had chances to go and visit lots of crazy and great people. Since there was water in the river, a gentleman I met in the lake and said, hey, I've got some horses. It's pretty rare to have water in it right now. Let's go and ride. If you're going to ride the horse in the water. And whenever anybody asked me to go and do something, my answer was always yes. So I did, got a chance to go and ride the horse in the water, which was wonderful. Never had that experience before. I got a chance to go ahead and swim with it, which was terrific. Wonderful stuff there going along. As you get further west, however, then this is what happens at Deerfield, Kansas. All the water gets diverted. Let me repeat that. All the water gets diverted for ditch irrigation purposes. So my next part of the trip really is from Deerfield to Wichita, that area which basically 21% is totally dry by virtue of irrigation during my lifetime. And all reports right now it's never going to come back, which I really get disappointed in as far as that situation. So here's what it looks like just to the east of Deerfield.
So this is just downriver of the Farmer's Ditch. And you can see the Arkansas River is gone. That's just the reality. So my trip is now going to be augmented by either walking or ATVs or just researching on my own until we get to about Hutchinson or Wichita. I will have to admit, it's a sad sight to see.
But it's not like the river was always that way. These are pictures of washing melons in the same location in 1895, water being used for that kind of purpose. If you look at Garden City, this is the bridge in Garden City back in kind of earlier times, and then also what it is currently today. Certainly different water flows. I don't believe this was taken during flood. I think it was during relatively high waters, but not flood stage. Also during that time period, you have ditches that were being built back in the 1880s by virtue of this is the Great Sewell Ditch just out of Dodge City. You can still see the remnants of that trying to take water from basically that part of southwest Kansas up to Spearville. So water had been used and been used to great effect. This is what that river and that location right now in Dodge City looks like. If you can see it on either side, there was a flood in 1961 where then the Corps of Engineers put a lot of riprap in to prevent from the next flooding, which is never going to happen. I did, however, in Dodge City, a gentleman came up to me and says, hey, you want to go ahead and ride an ATV in the sand bed of the Arkansas River? And my answer was, sure, I did. It is now being used for many festivals to go ahead and between Garden City and Dodge City, people use it on a regular basis because it's just a total dry stream bed. Still owned by the state of Kansas, by the way. In Dodge City as well, gentlemen asked me, say, well, you want to go and put your kayak in a Conestoga wagon? And the answer was, thank you, absolutely. Kind of fun thing to go and have that happen, traveling where you can and how you can as you go forward. That looks kind of strange going down Front Street, but what the heck, you know? Interesting. Now, if you go further to the east around Ford, then you see some of this stuff. The Ogallala comes back up into that area, and there's actually oases, which probably is the best term for it. And where there's water, there's vegetation, there's wildlife, there's fish, and so forth. Life comes back where indeed there's water, but it is very fleeting and goes back into the ground. At Kinsley, you see an area here as well, and there's Marcia going down an area, harvesting some plums and so forth. I show you that because that is an area that I have had experience. We can talk about it for questions later on as well. While I was city manager in Hayes, I was involved in purchasing the R9 Ranch, 7,000 acres of irrigated land, transporting water all the way up to Hayes, Kansas, that blue dot there. We won't talk more about that, but if you have questions about that, I can go on for hours about that particular situation, which is now taking water basically from the Arkansas River and moving it 85 miles to the north. And kind of transcending, if you will, that area between the Arkansas watershed and the Missouri River watershed. So a significant policy issue that they're embarking upon. Curious about that, we can answer questions about that particular water policy. But it shows you that indeed that area is changing. Demand for water is increasing to that kind of point where a community is spending millions of dollars to access that water for individuals to use. Also, we're going to reinforce again that the river has been significant. This is a picture in Great Bend, looking at the amount of water coming around back in 1872. So it was not an inconsequential river. It was something that indeed people use with great regularity. You read the journals of those who are traveling on the Santa Fe Trail, and they talk about stopping at Dodge City on the north side of the river to go ahead and raft up their wagons to make the crossing, which was very treacherous at that time. And we've destroyed that area, which is really difficult for me to go and stomach. If you go further east, and indeed you cross that line we just talked about, where rainwater comes into better view, you have some spring-fed areas with regards to the little Arkansas River coming in, and you have water coming in as well. This is what it looks like.
Arkansas River exists. As you can see, it's not very big.
I just think that's a cool shot. I'm going to be straddling the Arkansas River with my feet. Had to go and keep it in. Where there's water, things start coming back, and I think Kansas is trying to recognize issues right now. There actually is an Arkansas River water trail that goes from Great Bend all the way to the Oklahoma border. In the upper reaches of that is Hutchinson, and Hutchinson has developed a small commerce industry called the Arkansas Canoe and Kayak Rental Company that during the summertime you can actually go ahead and use. I've done that a couple of times with them. Here's what it looks like.
On the ark again by Hutchinson. Group's already left me, so I kind of give it up the rear. What a great experience. Back on the call. I'm back on the ark, sorry.
Misnomers that way. So now the next section, which basically goes from Wichita down to Tulsa, and you can kind of see that area that's in red and what that adventure kind of looks like for the next phase. Before I leave Wichita, I want to reinforce the fact that Wichita had its own level of riverboats as well. This is the Aunt Sally, pictures of that right near Douglas. So you can see that there were desires to have boat traffic all the way up to Wichita. There are actually desires, as we talk about the Arkansas and Colorado River Compact, started back in around 1910. Part of the effort was try to get barge traffic or river traffic all the way up to Dodge City. failed attempt, obviously. And Wichita is trying to do a better job of trying to incorporate the river. There now is an area just to the side of their low water dam, which actually is a kayak kind of raceway, if you will, taking advantage of that. You have Discovery Place, etc., that are taking more work of that. And I thought when I passed Wichita, I'd have plenty of water and I didn't have to drag anymore, right?
So someday I'll be able to get on a river that actually has water in it, enough to float, but not today. Perhaps another tablespoon of water and it might help, but so be it. So this is what my day is, basically. Float and drag, mostly drag, then float. Right by Mulvane, Kansas.
And I don't want to have you focus on my travails. I want you to focus on how beautiful it is. This area that is down by Mulvane and so forth, if you get a chance to travel it, please do. It is verdant, it is well maintained, and really a wonderful place to be. And I did take advantage of it by camping out on the river, both in 1976 and in 2018, although my campsite in 2018 is more unkempt than when I had in 1976. I don't know exactly why. Going in this section, however, I'm now comparing between 1976 and 2018. And one of the big changes is the limitation of these kind of a junkyard riprap areas. Since that time, I didn't see very much of this, but in 1976, the area was festooned, if you will, with car bodies and refrigerators and so forth, trying to do bank stabilization. And the EPA's done a pretty good job at trying to go ahead and get rid of that stuff. And the cities, I think, are taking more advantage of it now than they have in the past. Tulsa, for example, and this is Derby, for example, has made a very large investment with a wonderful park that just opened up in 2018, right on the river's edge for kayakers, canoeists, and fishermen alike. If you look further on down there, you come to some historic areas, one of which is Etzanoa at the confluence of the Wet Walnut and the Arkansas River, right at Arkansas City. Reported to go ahead and be a very old community from about between 1450 and 1700, which area may have occupied as many as 70,000 indigenous population all the way up the Ark River to Hutchinson. That's still being looked at, but it gives you a sense of the historical nature and how important the river was for indigenous populations that we're just now discovering and learning more about. As I went down in 2018, I remembered that indeed I did run across people that were very excited about being on the river down in that location, along with people currently as well, both in 1976 and 2018. And they would camp out and they would actually stop on this area, the confluence of the Wet Walnut and the Arkansas River, to go ahead and pick up arrowheads or go ahead and try to go ahead and fish and so forth. And as you can see by this video as well, it is beautiful.
Good place to fish. Really a pretty river. And hopefully diminish the sandbars.
Yeah. So the river is now changing completely, right? From a dry riverbed now to a much more flowable river and be able to passable as far as that's concerned, and maintains that way all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And as you go ahead and cross over into Oklahoma, you start encountering reservoirs, which are being used primarily for power generation and sometimes for water supply, both in terms of the Kaw Reservoir as well as the Keystone Reservoir. Unfortunately for me is that they did not have water coming out all the time of the day. So I was not very wise about that activity. So I'd have to go ahead and kind of park myself for a while or go across the rocks till they started generating power. And that was the case coming down out of Tulsa, out of Keystone Reservoir. Another example of kind of the amount of change from 1976 to currently is the idea that the belching, I'll use that term, of industrial waste out on the river was much less and probably non-existent in 2018 compared to 1976. A very happy blessing with regards to that. Additionally, Tulsa is now taking full advantage of that by the gathering place. If you've not seen that, please do go. It is about $1 billion investment, somewhat shy of that, but one of the best examples of a public park, I think, in the country. I think UNESCO has kind of cited as being a major achievement as well. Wonderful area to go ahead and look at. So let me talk about the next segment, which is the 5th of 6th, which indeed is Tulsa to the Mississippi River and what that looks like. That's this area you see in red, this whole location, the next snippet. And I want to give you a story here about what happened in Tulsa in 1976. I went to Tulsa and I visited one of my friends, went back to go get my kayak, and my kayak was stolen. Jesus, great. I give a call to my dad. My dad says, well, give up. Coming back home and says, I'm not going to give up. So I decided to go ahead and go to the newspaper and decided to go on the radio station and the TV station and say, I've lost my kayak. I'm trying to carry a bicentennial message from the mayor of Dodge City, mayor of New Orleans. Can you guys find my kayak? That gets picked up by the wire. And I become the yuck factor nationwide in Los Angeles and in New York City. And you can see on the right what the Tulsa paper said. Dodge citizen is up a creek. Great. Super. I did, however, get my kayak back from two different individuals, two moms. The kids had picked it up. They'd taken my kayak apart. And I spent July 4th pulling it back together again. So that's one of the travails that I learned to go ahead and kind of survive even though situations work. Kind of a humorous story to a degree. But I want to talk about this area in Tulsa because Tulsa now becomes a totally different river, all the way down from there down to the Mississippi. And that's because of the McClellan Kerr navigation system, a 450-mile-long navigation system that was put in place by virtue of the political will of two senators, Senator McClellan and Senator Kerr, who made negotiations with President Eisenhower to get the final votes to approve the interstate highway system. Basically, what was happening, they were holding up their votes saying they'll vote for the interstate highway system if indeed you'll vote for our McClellan Kerr navigation system. He said yes, they said yes, and we have this now system of 17 locks and dams and carrying a huge amount of commerce from actually 20% of the grain of that part of Kansas actually goes down to Catoosa and areas going out further. So it becomes a whole different river. Now it becomes a river of commerce, and there's no flow. There's 450 miles of just basically one long reservoir, which makes it difficult for paddling, but what the heck. This is what it looks like coming out of Catoosa, and I had the good fortune in 1976 to be in Catoosa just 2 years after it opened up. So very much a different situation now with much more cargo, and this is what it looks like.
First barge I've seen on the Rare Degrees Ark River, part of the McClellan Kerr navigation system, all the way down the Gulf of Mexico. So hitting the big water today. Woohoo!
It is fun to not have to go and get out of your kayak and drag it, several miles. So it was kind of fun to have that. Beautiful again, great fishing and so forth. But there are a series of locks and dams. This is just one of them, locks number 18, the kind of inverse order numbers. This is me on the left in 1976. It had flooded on the wet walnut, and all that debris was coming down and clogging me up into the lock. And the lock masters were fearful of me getting crushed, and I was not, which is very helpful that way. However, in 2018, this is the same lock, and I say no alligators yet, because further on down, going through the lock and dam, we were in the lock, and we saw this log come up, and we saw it go down, and we saw it go up, and we saw it go down. Alligators are coming up the Ark River. And it's one thing to go ahead and see an alligator kind of in the wild, but when you're in a concrete box and there's water being taken out, your blood pressure goes up a little bit as far as that's concerned. I'll bypass this video to a degree.
It would be now about some 32, 35 feet.
35 feet's a long ways down to go ahead and have those things. So a series of those barges going down on the McClellan Kerr navigation is pretty significant. Coming out of the locks and dams, however, then you kind of get out of the Rare Degrees River and back onto the Arkansas River, and it comes into places.
So here it is on the Arkansas River, just east of Muskogee, and you can see the escarpment coming in from the Arkansas. We haven't seen that for a while. Those are big, huge bluffs coming up, kind of containing the river. So a little bit change in landscape here as further we get to the east, getting ready to cross over and getting closer to Fort Smith. The Arkansas River, east of Muskogee.
Now, with barge traffic on the river and so forth, even in the area of the Arkansas River, you have conflicts with indeed barge traffic and indeed bridges, and that's what happened at Weber Falls in 2002, where a barge did collide in it and several people perished by driving their vehicles into the water. There's actually a monument in Weber Fall as well. So those have consequences for barge traffic as far as that's concerned. However, if you've not seen barge traffic, it's fascinating to go and watch that system work going through a barge. And the economic advantages are very profound. And we're talking about basically 9 barges is the maximum you can have in the lock and dam system in the Arkansas River. Shuffling around would be kind of difficult. And there's good adequate water for me to go ahead and paddle. But like I said, there's no there is no flow. So much so that if you talk about Kerr Reservoir, I would have to paddle for miles and miles and miles with no wind whatsoever trying to cross a reservoir. And inadvertently or invariably, what would happen on a reservoir is that the wind would always be in my face, which was double disadvantage. But I did make it that way, and good again, very kind of beautiful territory. But these are massive water reservoirs in Oklahoma. I did get a chance down to Fort Smith, and in 1976, I got a chance to meet up with Colonel Schneider. I didn't know he was a colonel at that time. Here's the story. I go ahead and I get down to Fort Smith late in the afternoon. I'm going by a series of houseboats. There's a gentleman who's drinking a martini on the back end of the houseboat, and he says, "Hey, you want to have a martini?" My answer was, "Absolutely." So I said, "Yeah, we'll come in." We started drinking and laughing, having a good times as well. "What are you doing?" "Carrying the bison tail mass, yada yada yada," those sort of things. "Well, hey, you want to come and I work on the National Guard base, and we probably can find you some accommodation." I was thinking of barracks and so forth. He then takes me up to his house. He has me take a shower. Whenever I met somebody, I always had to take a shower, which was kind of interesting. They fed me dinner, and then he said, "Well, let's go into the base." I did. He was wearing civilian clothes. People are starting to salute him left and right. Come to find out, he was the base commander, and I get put up in the VIP headquarters where the president would stay when they come down to Fort Smith. I had my own private chef. I had several Army officers around me. I had my own private pool. It was a fantastic experience. And this is him in the cockpit of his own F-104 jet. Labeled him, and I just really appreciated the kind of people you run into the river you would not expect, but kind of having that kind of personal connection with those individuals that appreciate what you're doing was fascinating. The next day I had a similar experience when I went out of there, and I wanted to go ahead and have that Mark Twain experience to work on barges in 1976, and I was fortunate to connect with this gentleman, Don Marshall, who indeed was the captain of the Bill Cad, a tugboat towboat. I'll tell you the distinction. If you're curious about the difference, ask me afterwards. The towboat, at that point in time, he built himself. It was the only one that I could actually commandeer because they're all union operations. They wouldn't let me be on. So at that point in time, I signed on for 10 days, roping barges up and down the river, and had that Mark Twain experience. Fascinating thing to go ahead and have. I did that across Arkansas, and I did in 2018. I wanted to recreate that with my buddies, much smaller craft, but indeed it did work going across Arkansas with that. And this is what it looks like to look at basically Little Rock from the river perspective. The interesting thing about being in the rivers in these large areas is you get the sense to see the rivers or see where communities are and why they're there, a perspective you don't often get otherwise. The last section that Tripoli talks about from the Mississippi all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, this area written in red. And here's what it looks like coming out of the river areas, navigation area under the Mississippi.
The mouth of the White and the mighty Mississippi. Only 590 miles to go. A little cloudy day, but doing okay. Go down about 9 miles and pull off. Should be good.
The significance about this video is look at all the sandbars. It was really low water in 2018, so maybe to go ahead and camp out was not a problem. I had plenty of sandbars to go ahead and camp out on a regular basis. But there are other hazards or issues that I did have to deal with. I didn't have to have on the Arkansas River because the barge traffic was not that frequent on the Arkansas River. But on the Mississippi, about every 20 minutes, either up traffic or down traffic. And here's how big those barges are.
So this is one of the larger tows I've seen in the river so far. 49 barges, all lashed together. Man, what a deal.
7 football fields, basically, and that's not treacherous by itself. I'm a matchstick on the Mississippi River, but look at this, the wake it does behind him, trying to avoid that whole thing. So that becomes a hazard one has to go and accommodate. There are other hazards, interesting people along the river as well. I ran across these people, this family, that indeed had a houseboat, about 7 of them, a small motor, about a 42 horsepower motor behind them, enjoying the river as a recreational opportunity. I go alongside and they said, "Do you want a beer?" And my answer was, "Absolutely." Have another beer. We started drinking, having a good time. I go on down. I see the captain then go ahead and yank on his engine, trying to get it started. It would not start. having a 45 horsepower on the Mississippi River is kind of insane, but I was trying to go and do. He needed to get to shore. I think his engine felt failure and so forth. So he said, well, I'm going to go ahead and take all my people there, give them parachute cord and put them in the river and swim to shore. And I heard this, if there's a definition of somebody who indeed is in distress, that is it. I paddled back up and I said, give me your tow boat, your tow rope, and I will paddle you to safety. I couldn't have done that a month before. So there's some advantages to this kind of river excursions, getting yourself in shape. Daily life, I can talk much more about it if you have questions about that, but basically canned food, biscuits, very little amount of food, because I just wasn't that hungry, and I tried to eat underway under a parasol and so forth. I do want to underscore how beautiful the river is, and how calming it is. We have an impression like the Missouri River or other rivers and big rivers and so forth, they are treacherous and dangerous. You have to be indeed cognizant of that. If you heard Rex's commentary this morning, you can't be drunk and you got to wear a life jacket. I get it. But this is beautiful. This is not an isolated situation. And I had that routinely night after night after night. The only problem with it is I was doing it by myself. So it's like if you're a golfer, you have a hole-in-one, but no witnesses. You know, how do you talk about that? Becomes that issue. In 1976, I did have some treacherous experience as well, one of which is looking at down this barge area, or this dredge. I countered this dredge in the middle of the river. I see the pipe going along and spewing out all this stuff. Well, I'm not going to go over there. I just head straight for the dredge. As I get closer, people are starting to wave at me. I said, well, they've heard about my trip. They're welcoming it. That's really cool. And so I get closer and closer. The intercom comes and says, you're heading for the dredge. And they literally pulled me out of my kayak about 10 feet away, this turning going on actions. The captain was livid, appropriately so. Comes out in his underwear. Just starts reading me what I call the riot act. And was so just livid from that point. He said, what are you doing? I'm carrying a bicentennial. Oh, well, that sounds pretty crazy. That sounds pretty cool. Why don't you come aboard? He then puts me up in his VIP headquarters, has his chef go ahead and serve me a 5-course meal, wonderful kind of accommodations. You got to take a shower. I had to take a shower. And then the next morning, all these fellows here give me 2 grocery bags full of bologna sandwiches. I appreciated the effort. I can't eat that much, but it gives you the sense of the sentiment of how much people appreciated people's sense of adventure and spirit of being on the river. I wasn't quite that fortunate in 2018, very close to Natchez. I wake up in the morning and I'm sweating all the way through my mattress and so forth. I didn't wear hardly anything. And I found myself being cold and clammy and also having very irritable. I don't get irritable quite that much. I recognize that I was in heat exhaustion or heat stroke. How do you get myself off the river? Which is one of the advantages of doing this trip the second time and knowing about what your limitations are. I may not have been that wise when I was a younger gentleman. But I pulled myself off and basically recovered for a while. And when you're indeed after heat exhaustion or dehydration, you travel via, a U-Haul. So I used that for a little bit to kind of go down further and finally got out down to Baton Rouge. This is what it looks like in Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge, Mississippi River, in addition to large towboats.
Now we're getting to the big iron. We're talking about super tankers and so forth, and everything becomes an industrial corridor all the way from Baton Rouge down to the Gulf of Mexico. We can also talk about stories about why Baton Rouge is that way and the location. If you have questions, I'll answer those after the presentation. I get down to New Orleans in 1976, and I encounter this particular boat, a Russian boat, that could speak very little English, but on the stern, this gentleman says in very clear English, "You're crazy," which was interesting. So that was my welcome to New Orleans. People recognize that it was a fairly foolish act to go ahead and be down there and continue on. In 2018, you can see this where I put in as well, and you can see all the super tanker transport items coming upriver and going downriver. They're treacherous because they don't make any sound. They're very efficient that way, both upside and downside. You then start seeing the stacking of large ships waiting to get loaded up with their material in New Orleans. This is what it looks like.
This gives you a little different perspective, of a little kayak against some of these large boats. All stacked up here in the Mississippi River, getting ready to, I believe, load up and New Orleans, given that they're empty. Really cool.
Give you a sense of perspective, my kayak is about 16 feet long. Just one half of the blade is about 16 feet long of those large ships. I did make it down to Venice Light, and I had my crew there to go and be with me as well, which was wonderful. My wife Marcia to welcome me from that activity. And here's the vision that I had. The vision I had was to go ahead and pour a drop of water from the Continental Divide down to the Gulf of Mexico.
All the way from Tennessee Pass to the Gulf of Mexico. There you go. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I got a beat.
You can't choose your relatives, right? Okay. Yeah, you can't choose your relatives. I do want to talk about the end of the trip here that the support team is important. I talk about these trips as though it's a lone cowboy affair. It's not. A great support team, both in 1976, although it was very limited, my parents, and then obviously in 2018 with great people along as far as that is concerned. So that kind of is the conclusion of the adventures contrasted in some small way. I'd be happy to go and answer more questions coming up after this, as well as tomorrow morning, talking all about the Water Transfer Acts, talk about the Kansas, Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, Arkansas River Compact, anything along the trip and so forth, and what I learned, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to answer some questions before we do that. My friend Rex Buchanan asked this, which is good. Why did I take this trip? I can tell you it's different for different times. 1976, it was pure adventure. And I was trying to go ahead and fulfill my father's dream, which we can also talk about as well if you are curious about it. 2018, it was to fulfill a long-held dream of following a drop of water from the continental divide down to the Gulf of Mexico. That notion we have as children, where does the water come from and where does it go? And I didn't give up on that sense of adventure. I wanted to relive basically what happened in 1976 to capture part of my youth, and I can't. And that's okay. And that's okay. To reflect, heal, and adjust to a different life following decades of public administration. I've been 40 years as a public administrator. If I don't do that, what am I now? What am I supposed to be? What's my identity? And most importantly, to think. To think. That's what I've evolved to right now, but it's still continuing to kind of fester and saying, why do I do this trip? Why did I do it? And do I want to do something else like that in the future? What have I learned? I can still survive on my own. In 1976, I was somewhat as a tenuous 22-year-old. Where was my life going to be? Can I survive or not? And I found out after 2 months in the river, handling all these issues, yeah, I can survive. Yeah, I can be on my own. Traveling by myself builds self-reflection and personal calm, but it makes me lonely, and I've got to find the right balance there. We have forgotten as a society, in my viewpoint, that rivers are still the lifeblood of the country, but a more positive attitude is emerging. I've learned that this country is beautiful. I didn't find any place that was ugly or sullen I wouldn't want to go back and look at. Not any place. The big learnings. I'm not too old to experience all that life offers. Mature people can still have adventures. I've learned that I need to keep promises to myself. How many times have we done a promise? I think I should go ahead and do that. I promised to go ahead and do that. How often do we put those aside and not keep those promises to ourselves? I've learned that I want to live my life in a way that others will want to follow. It's a tough, tall order. I have learned that the environment and the politics of the Ark and the Mississippi rivers have changed over 42 years, but not the people. They are all still beautiful. There wasn't anybody I encountered, black, white, rich, poor, etc., that wasn't willing to give me literally the shirt off their back. The most frequently asked question on my trip, 2018, wasn't what kind of gear do you have, where you're going, what's the purpose, and so forth, is are you carrying a gun? Are you carrying a gun? They were not fearful of me, they were fearful for me because of this device. We look at it all the time. Somebody burps in Belgium, we hear about it, and we assume our neighborhood's the same way. That's my assessment of it. Those things I think are important for us to reflect upon. What about my future efforts? What's the purpose of all that sort of stuff? You put your butt in the kayak for 2 months, you start thinking about stuff, right? And you come to the conclusion that indeed time is the only thing you can't replace. So what am I going to do? I'm going to establish and reestablish and deepen my relationship with my family and friends, because you can't replace that time. My family has sacrificed a lot for me going to evening meetings ad nauseum. I've not been as close to my friends as I need to be. How do I change that? How do I enhance that? Because I need to improve that. I want to advance a culture of mutual caring in the Kansas City metro area. It's kind of odd, but I've become very fond of the Kansas City region. And if we don't care about what happens at 18th Street and Vine and what happens in Springfield and other areas, we're not going to be the world-class community we desire to be. I want to inspire and nurture the current and future generations of public servants. That's why I was teaching the last 6 years. Make sure indeed they have the support to carry on the great work of our democracy. And finally, I want to be an advocate for the Arkansas River and the world environment in general. My question is, what are your future efforts? What are you going to do? What promises do you have that you haven't taken from that perspective? How are you going to have more meaning in your life? As for me, I will continue from here to wherever the river takes me. Thank you.
If you have questions, we'll ask that you raise your hand, and Elliot will bring you the microphone so the people who are online can hear your question.
I enjoyed your presentation very much. You mentioned Baton Rouge and that the big ships start to appear there, and you said that there was a reason why. So I was curious as to what that reason was.
Well, yeah, I think Huey Long, notorious for being a governor from that point, was trying to negotiate people across the bridge from whatever kind of province or so forth to share in the expense. They refused to do that, so he built the ridge low enough that nothing else could go further upstream. So big tankers have to stop there because you can't get any further up. Huey Long. Yes.
You may have mentioned this, and I just missed it or forgot, but how long, time-wise, did each trip take?
About 2 months on the first one, and about 2.5 months the second one. I tried to, the second one really tried to buttonhole it between Labor Day, Memorial Day, and Labor Day. So I kind of did that because I wanted to have people to kind of partake in it if they could, and join me at various sections if they could join along with that stuff. That took about that long. Now, I did it as well. I wanted to do it in one fell swoop, I'll use that term, as opposed to piecemeal. I felt it was important to get continuity and understand really the flow, if you will, the river, and get a sense of continuity of what it looks like. And in order to do that, I had to sacrifice one or the other. I had to start in the spring to get flowed and enough water to go through Colorado. And if I did that, I'd sacrifice being down in Louisiana in August. There's a reason why there are no outside festivals in Louisiana in August. But I made that choice. So I kind of did it that way and try to figure out during that 2 month, 2.5 month frame, where was the best way to start and stop. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really loved your reflections at the end. I'm wondering, could you, about, you said being really dedicated to thinking about not just our kind of small neighborhoods or towns, but thinking about like the Kansas City metro area. How do you think we can get people in environments that are not that don't live near a river and can't see the beauty or feel the tranquility of like the sunset or the like I was really taken by your videos and the sound of the water and the sound of the wind and just how that makes my body feel.
Yeah.
But for people who don't have those experiences, how do you make people care about a river or these kinds of landscapes and that they are connected to something that they might think is totally out of the realm of their experience?
Well, first of all, in Southwest Kansas, there has to be water. One of the statements I say is, what do you call a river that has no water in it? You call it anything else but a river. So I think that's one you have to have actually water in it to make it work. And I think in Southwest Kansas, they're struggling with that. You have a thing called the Arkansas River. There's no water in it ever. How do you go ahead and make some sort of affinity to that? Other places that have water and have rivers, I think getting out and accessing it. I think Parkville is a good example, and many other communities as well. Lawrence being a good example, where you're trying to find pathways where people can get along with the river and kind of interact with it in a way they feel comfortable. I think demystifying, or at least demonizing large rivers. We have to remember that these large rivers were our interstate highways until about 100 years ago. It would have been commonplace in 1890 to have tons of people on the river, and small boats and tugouts and so forth. So I think demystifying it to say use it responsibly and get out on it would be appropriate. I think other ways is the larger question maybe be talking about how do you get people to care about one another. If I had the answer, I'd be making lots of dollars here as far as that's concerned. But I think one of the things about that, I believe, is to get away from this device and to become more personally interactive, things like this, to be together in a physical environment. I think a good place to start is actually neighborhoods, where neighborhoods you can start meeting your neighbor. I am distressed that indeed we all become hermetically sealed in our electronic doors to go ahead and drive in. The doors goes down and we don't see anything of our neighbors, don't even know if they exist, don't know if they're alive or well. I think we have to break down that by bringing some really good old-fashioned, or new-fashioned deals about meeting your neighbor and having a relationship. What I've been being adopted these days is to say, connect before content. Have a relationship before you're talking about other issues you want to talk about. But meet people at their level, understand who they are, what their family's like, and just having a communication. Have an ice cream social in your neighborhood. Starting small and working bigger. I think that's important. I view Johnson County. I had the good fortune of being Johnson County manager, 650,000 people. But I really believe that was my neighborhood. So I traveled around the thing all the darn time. I met with a lot of different people. And I think that neighborhood then also being part of the metro area is important. We make up so many barriers. We make so much assumptions about one another because we don't have the communication. It's been well documented that in the absence of information just makes stuff up, which oftentimes is just wrong. So I think communication is really important.
I really enjoyed your presentation. You said that the Arkansas River in southwest Kansas isn't coming back.
Correct.
Can you say more about that?
Well, there's some good documentation. The Kansas Electoral Survey has talked about some of that stuff. It now becomes basically a dead zone where all the water should have come in now has to go and replenish the diminishing Ogallala Aquifer. So we pump the Ogallala Aquifer so much that the alluvial aquifer basically is non-existent. So any water that's going to come in is going to stay there. It's not going to go beyond there. And I'm getting out of my lane of expertise, but I think that's what I believe is the case. Rex, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the situation. It's staying there and not going anywhere. And that does two things in terms of water supply, but also more importantly by virtue of the contaminants that are being allowed to get deposited there as well, which has, I think, long-term impact on the quality of the Ogallala Aquifer that people might use for consumption. Did I do okay?
I would say if that water was not diverted at Deerfield, if you had a long enough period of time, the river would recover. I mean, a really long period of time. You would get recharge of that alluvial aquifer, and then you wouldn't be losing stream flow. It's doable, but not when the river disappears. Deterioration.
Thank you. I should have put the caveat. Under current policy and the way it's currently being used, it's not going to come back. And I think that's the reality of it. Until we change our policies about ditch irrigation, which I think is going to be difficult to change, that's the future. It's non-existent. Yeah.
I'm curious about your comment about being unable to recapture your youth, but trying. And I wondered if you could, if you care to share a little bit more about what you were trying to recapture and then how you reconciled with that.
These are tough questions. Yeah. I think the sense of the invincibility of being bulletproof would be part of that. I was able to recapture the sense of adventure because if you're by yourself, I remember going to some place in the evening saying, well, my kayak's screwed up and I got to lift it up over this embankment and I got to set up the tent. And I said, nobody else is going to do it but me. I better get my ass in gear. So I was able to recapture that. But the idea of being invincible and being bulletproof, I was sore a lot of the time, and I found that I couldn't do. I had to park myself on shore because I had this issues with dehydration and those sort of things. Perhaps a younger person maybe could have survived better or made better choices. So I think that's the part that I had. And I think I reconciled to say that I can't do everything, but I can do something. And I can go ahead and make adventures that are fit to my physical capacity, whatever that might be. And I have to be wise enough to recognize that, but also have the courage to do those things I still feel I can and still have adventures. And the most important thing to have on these trips, in my viewpoint, is not the physical capacity. It's not the amount of money. It's not the time necessary. It is the will to do so. It is the will to do so. It is the will to go ahead and say, I'm keeping a promise to myself, and I'm really going to do this. And having that determination to do it. I've seen many people that kind of have these visions, but not have actualized it. So having the will to do it, Confucius said, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the very first step, but also the next step, and the next step, and the next step. Yes, sir.
I was born and raised in this area, but my first job was in Denver. So I'm familiar with their water wars going from Continental Divide west. So the legal aspects, what you've run into of the water flowing east, is it pretty much like the wars they're fighting on water going west?
I think so, yes. It's probably not to the same degree as the Colorado. Remember that, I didn't mention, the Arkansas water compact between Colorado and Kansas was indeed the precursor for the Colorado River Compact as well. So it's been a long-standing course of debate for now over 110 years. It was re-adjudicated again in late 1990s and early 2000s. And whether or not be adjudicated again, I don't know. There's still a compact board of directors that looks at that on a regular basis to see if things are fair. So yes, I think it is similar to that on the western side of the Continental Divide. The conversations happening around Pueblo and so forth continue with how much water is being taken out of that to go up to Colorado Springs. Primarily, the debate now is it appropriate to take all the irrigation rights and convert them to municipal use, basically drying up the valley from agricultural purposes. So that debate's going on as well. Yeah, so it continues on. I think the adage, I said it earlier today, that whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over, is very true.
You said something about people care about it, but they don't care about the Arkansas River or Arkansas River.
That's right.
Can you say a little bit more about? I think you've said more, but
Well, I think that the ever since we decided to go ahead and just harvest the water for our own economic purposes and disregard the natural environment and the consequences, I think we have basically said the river's not worth saving. I don't know of any. There probably are. I don't know of any other large river in this country that has suffered as much as the Arkansas River has in Southwest Kansas. I think the Red River still flows. I think the Platte still flows, admittedly at different times, but I think it still exists. It doesn't exist that way for about 21% in Southwest Kansas from Deerfield all the way to Great Bend, in my estimation. So I think that what I'm saying is people want to use that resource for economic development. What I don't think people look at, they don't look at the impact on the environment and to see what's the consequences of that. And I think you're seeing that in Southwest Kansas with regards to the Ogallala, in my view. It's called water mining for a reason, right? So we use it as though it is a finite, an infinite resource that doesn't have consequences for our economic use. And we give little value, in my viewpoint, for the wildlife and the environment that is sustained by the water that goes down those areas. And I think associate an economic value to that as well. Were we to have water in Southwest Kansas, I think there'd be other ways to go ahead and get money, much like I think we've done, maybe not to the same extent you see around Salida, but I think there'll be ways to use that water to some effect. So I think at least the part that is on the western side of that arrow. It's all about water supply, and it's all about trying to get the water for our use. Were we to be on the eastern side, it's all about trying to get rid of it, right? So I think that at least for that is true. People care about the water in western Kansas, eastern Colorado, but not the river itself. It's hard for me to articulate more of that, but you can see the dramatic video of just going down from Deerfield on a dry riverbed. People have given up on it. They're turning it into, which is okay, a large go-kart track for ATVs and for horses, which is what I've advocated. Actually, we might look at that. Try to go ahead and make that a marketable deal, since the state of Kansas still owns the property. So I think, the very little regard for the river itself, but for the water it contains.
Thank you. Some of what you've talked about is pretty large scale, long time, long river, long distance. But we've got a nice river 2 miles away from here. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about what the people in this room could do to get a taste of the serenity and the beauty of being on a river that you've talked about.
Well, thanks, Charles. I think the way you do it is just by engaging with the river, by getting out on it. The Friends of the Kaw are wonderful resources that way. Get a boat, go with somebody, taking a small daytime journey from Lecompton to Lawrence would be wonderful. There's very little obstructions. There are no obstructions, and good flow. And we've done, regularly going out to go ahead and just kind of get in a boat and grab a lunch and be out on the river and seeing the wildlife, the eagles and the egrets. We saw some egrets as well. Turtles, the whole 9 yards. And right on the edge of that, you see thousands of people that are in their homes that don't access the river whatsoever. It doesn't cost any money. It's free. You don't pay a fee for it. You just get on the boat and you go and park at various places. It's a very easily accessible river, at least particularly here in Lawrence, from Lecompton down. No obstructions, no portages are required. So that's what I would advocate doing. Just get on the flipping river and enjoy it. Wear a life jacket. Don't be drunk.
Well, we are about out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much for a really engaging and thought-provoking talk. Thank you all for your questions. If you're free tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., we'll be back here in this room again and have Professor Zacharias in conversation with Shannon Stewart, who's part of Outdoors Unscripted. And we'll have juice and coffee and pastries. So please join us if you can. And let's thank Professor Zacharias once again.